A millionaire CEO walked into his opulent bathroom and discovered a cleaning lady fast asleep on the toilet lid, and, against all odds, found himself falling hopelessly in love. Elara Collins was on the edge of her endurance. For the past week, she had been grinding through double shifts, cleaning hotel rooms by day and covering night shifts for a so-called friend who had an endless supply of excuses. Now, completely worn out, she resembled a zombie clutching a mop as she moved through the hallways. The VIP suite was her last stop. All she wanted was to get it over with and collapse into her bed, dragging her feet like someone wading through quicksand. She shuffled into the lavish bathroom. Her mouth fell open as she took in the sheer grandeur of the place. It was larger than her entire apartment. Seriously? Who needs a bathroom this enormous? You could fit a whole football team in here. Does it echo too? She mumbled to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Mechanically, she poured disinfectant into the sink and began scrubbing, wiping, rinsing. The rhythm so familiar her body moved on autopilot. Fatigue blurred her senses, making her movements slow and heavy. When she leaned over to clean around the enormous bathtub, she rested her head on her arm for what she convinced herself would be just a moment. Just 5 seconds. 5 little seconds, she murmured, her eyelids fluttering. But her body had other plans. Her exhaustion swallowed her whole, and before she knew it, she was sound asleep, curled up on the toilet lid, her shoulders rising and falling in deep rhythmic breaths. Lucian Scott, billionaire CEO and master of his universe, had just endured a grueling day of back-to-back meetings, strategic arguments, and enough handshakes to last a lifetime. All he craved was solitude and the relief of a steaming hot shower. The moment he stepped into his private suite, he began shedding his meticulously tailored suit. Tie loosened, shirt half unbuttoned, shoes kicked off. He moved with single-minded purpose toward the bathroom, his sanctuary of tranquility. He swung the door open, his mind already drifting to the thought of hot water cascading over his shoulders. He barely registered his surroundings as he strode inside, until he froze in his tracks. What the? His voice ricocheted off the marble walls, amplifying the shock. Lucian's heart felt like it had tried to leap out of his chest and run away. There, in his bathroom, leaning against the toilet lid, was a woman, fast asleep. A complete stranger, in his hotel suite, in his sacred space. For a split second, sheer panic gripped him. Was this some sort of ambush, a security breach? Was she dead? His first irrational impulse was to hurl his half-removed shirt at her like some sort of makeshift weapon. The noise jolted Elara out of her impromptu nap, and she woke with a start, her body jerking backward. Her elbow collided with the cleaning bucket, sending soapy water cascading across the pristine floor. "Oh my God, what's happening?" she shrieked, her eyes wide with shock. Lucian staggered back, as if he'd seen a ghost climb out of his bathtub drain. "Who are you, and what the hell are you doing in my room?" he demanded, his voice somewhere between outrage and disbelief. Elara's vision swam as she tried to make sense of the scene in front of her. Her gaze landed on the tall, shirtless man, dark hair tousled, his sculpted shoulders heaving with adrenaline and eyes blazing with fury. And yet, he was devastatingly handsome. She blinked, her brain piecing together fragments of her fractured memory. Extravagant bathroom, overwhelming fatigue, her housekeeping uniform, and, oh no, the VIP guest. His room reality crashed down on her all at once. This was his suite, and she was the intruder. Reality crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Elara went rigid, eyes growing impossibly wider before she blurted out, "I didn't rob you, I swear." Lucian blinked, momentarily thrown off. "What?" "I just fell asleep here," the words tumbled out, and she instantly regretted them. That sounded terrible. She threw her hands up in a gesture of surrender, as if expecting a security guard to burst in at any moment. "I was just cleaning and decided to take a nap in my bathroom?" Lucian cut in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or is your cleaning method some revolutionary technique involving naps on toilet lids?" Elara's face burned. This was bad. Very bad. She scrambled to find words that wouldn't make her sound like a lunatic. It's not exactly like that. I mean, it is, but..." Lucian pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly battling to keep his composure. "So, what's next? Should I expect other hotel staff napping in my closet? Maybe under the bed too?" It was a very quick nap, she protested, her voice rising defensively. Oh, I'm sure. Just a harmless little 30-minute nap on the toilet seat? It was only 5 minutes. He arched an eyebrow, folding his arms across his broad chest. Do you have a stopwatch in your brain or something? Elara felt herself shrinking under his glare. This was the worst day of her life. She took a deep breath and decided to tell the truth. Sir, I know how bad this looks, but I work double shifts day and night. I ran out of fuel. My body shut down. Lucian's jaw tightened as he looked at her, his eyes studying her face. For a moment, she was sure he was about to throw her out, or worse, call security. But then, something in his expression softened, just a fraction. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing just a bit. This was it. He was going to yell, maybe even fire her. Elara braced herself for the worst. But instead, Lucian did something she never could have anticipated. He turned around and walked out of the bathroom. Confused, Elara hesitated before scrambling after him, trailing behind as he made his way through the opulent suite and into the kitchen area. She stopped abruptly as he spun around to face her, his face unreadable. Do you drink coffee? Elara's jaw dropped. Huh? Coffee? He repeated, as if this were the most logical question in the world. Do you drink it? Yes, but I don't understand. Before she could finish, he was already moving. Grabbing a cup from the sleek countertop, he filled it from the state-of-the-art coffee machine and handed it to her. Drink this. Still stunned, Elara accepted the cup, the warmth spreading through her fingers. She lifted it to her nose and took a cautious sniff. Immediately, her nose wrinkled at the bitter, overpowering aroma. Lucian watched her reaction, the corner of his mouth twitching. Strong, isn't it? It's imported from Ethiopia, supposed to be the best in the world, tastes like rocket fuel. Elara looked up at him, her confusion evident. Why? Are you giving me coffee? Lucian leaned against the marble counter, crossing his arms as he regarded her. Because you look like you're about to pass out again, and I don't feel like explaining to hotel management why there's a housekeeper unconscious on my bathroom floor. Elara's face turned bright red. I'm so sorry. I really didn't mean. He held up a hand to stop her. Look, you fell asleep. It happens. Just drink the coffee before you collapse somewhere less convenient, like my bed. His tone was serious, but his eyes sparkled with a hint of amusement. Elara's embarrassment softened, replaced by relief and, though she hated to admit it, a tiny spark of admiration. She took a sip, wincing at the potent bitterness. Ooh, wow, this is strong. Lucian chuckled, his first genuine smile since the encounter began. Yeah, that stuff could wake the dead. Elara managed a small smile, feeling her pulse slow down just a little. Maybe she wouldn't be fired after all, or at the very least, she might survive this mortifying ordeal with her dignity somewhat intact. This is terrible. Lucian raised an eyebrow, his curiosity clearly piqued. You could tell just by the smell? Elara hesitated, suddenly feeling trapped under his scrutinizing gaze. Yes? For a brief moment, a spark of intrigue flickered in his eyes. Lucian Scott, the man renowned for his cold, businesslike demeanor and unshakable composure, was intrigued. It was a rarity that would have stunned anyone who knew him. Meanwhile, Elara was gripping the coffee cup as if it were a live grenade, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Lucian's expression remained unreadable, his arms crossed, his posture calm but commanding. He didn't look away from her, his gaze unwavering, and she could feel herself sinking under the intensity of his stare. A heavy silence filled the room, and Elara's heart thudded anxiously in her chest. Finally, she gathered enough courage to ask, So, am I fired? Her voice came out barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder would make the answer worse. Lucian tilted his head thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing. I haven't decided yet. Elara felt her knees go weak, panic clawing at her insides. You haven't? Instead of answering, Lucian glanced down at the cup, swirling the dark liquid inside with a contemplative look. Before I decide, explain something to me. How did you know this coffee was terrible without even tasting it? Elara blinked. She hadn't expected that question. It's just obvious, she stammered, feeling the heat of embarrassment rise to her cheeks. It smells burnt and the beans were over-roasted. That makes it too bitter, and it seems like someone tried to cover up the bitterness with sugar, but that only made it worse. Lucian's eyebrows shot up, clearly impressed. And you figured all that out just from the smell? Elara opened her mouth, then closed it again, her thoughts scrambling. Why was he so interested in this? Was this some kind of trick question? She nervously shrugged. I swear, I don't do this all the time, she muttered, trying to downplay it. I just noticed. Lucian stared at her in silence, his face unreadable. It felt like an eternity before he finally moved. He stepped back and leaned casually against the counter, his arms still folded but his posture more relaxed. Perfect. Elara's jaw dropped. Perfect? You're going to help me fix this problem, Lucian stated, his tone so matter-of-fact that it took a second for Elara to process his words. She blinked, trying to make sense of what he just said. I'm going to… What? Lucian's eyes gleamed with determination. The hotel's coffee is awful. I've complained about it more times than I can count, but no one seems capable of fixing it. If you can tell what's wrong just by the smell, then maybe you can figure out what's wrong with the other dishes too. Elara let out a disbelieving laugh. Oh sure, because clearly that's what a cleaning staff member is supposed to do. As of now, yes. Her mouth fell open. Excuse me? Lucian's expression was perfectly serious. Now you do, he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Elara's head was spinning. But I just clean. I don't know anything about fixing food. Lucian shrugged as if that were merely a minor inconvenience. You knew this coffee was terrible before you even tasted it. I've hired so-called coffee experts who couldn't figure out what was wrong, and yet you did. That's all the qualification I need. Elara stared at him, utterly speechless. This man was out of his mind. He couldn't be serious. I really don't think… I'll pay you, Lucian interrupted, his voice firm. Double what you're making now. Elara's protest died in her throat. Double? That would be enough to pay off her overdue bills. Maybe even enough to take a day off without worrying about next month's rent. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her thoughts tangling together. But why me? Lucian's eyes softened, just a touch. Because you're the first person in months who's been honest with me, he admitted, his voice lower. Everyone else just tells me what they think I want to hear. You, on the other hand, told me my coffee was terrible without a second thought. Elara felt her cheeks heat up. I didn't mean to offend you. I'm not offended, Lucian assured her, his lips curving into a small, almost invisible smile. I'm impressed. She swallowed, her fingers tightening around the cup. I don't even know where to start. I'll take care of that, he replied, already pulling out his phone. First, we'll meet with the head chef, then we'll go through the menu, and after that, he glanced up at her, his gaze intense and unwavering. We fix everything that's wrong, one dish at a time. Elara's heart raced as she realized there was no backing out, not with the way he was looking at her, like she was the missing piece of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve. This was insane, completely, utterly insane. But then again, so was napping on a toilet lid in a VIP suite, and she had already survived that. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders. All right, let's fix it. Lucian's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Good. Welcome to your new job, Elara. Elara stared at him as if he'd just suggested she jump off a cliff without so much as a safety harness. I can't just suddenly become a food expert. Lucian's expression didn't change. In fact, his confidence seemed to grow. He pointed at the cup she was still gripping like a lifeline. You don't have to. You already are. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Nothing came out. Was he serious? How was she supposed to respond to that? He had to be joking, but his unyielding expression said otherwise. Sir, Scott, right? She began, trying to regain some semblance of normalcy. Look, I appreciate whatever this is, but I just need my job. I can't lose it. Lucian's brows knitted together, a hint of irritation flickering across his face. And who said anything about firing you? Elara's thoughts screeched to a halt. She stared at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of trickery. Was this some elaborate test? One wrong move and she'd be out the door. This isn't a test, is it? She asked hesitantly. If I say no, you won't fire me, right? Lucian let out a sigh, his patience clearly wearing thin. If I were going to fire you, Elara, I'd have done it already. Probably back when I found you napping on my toilet. His lips twitched at the memory, but his expression stayed serious. Now, are you going to help me fix this mess, or do you plan on arguing all day? Elara's head spun. None of this made sense. She'd been convinced she was about to lose her job, and now the CEO was recruiting her for food tasting? This had to be a dream, a really weird, sleep-deprived hallucination. She narrowed her eyes, suspicion creeping in. If this is some kind of trick to fire me later, I swear. Lucian rolled his eyes, cutting her off. Less drama, more coffee. He turned and began walking toward the suite's door. Now come on, you've got a breakfast to taste. Elara stood frozen, her brain trying to catch up. Wait, what? What? Lucian glanced back, his expression one of impatience. Do you want to keep arguing, or do you want to get this over with? She knew she should refuse. She should walk away, insist on returning to her cleaning duties, and pretend this entire bizarre encounter never happened. But then again, he still hadn't fired her, and if she had even the slightest chance of keeping her job. With a resigned sigh, Elara followed him out the door. Fine, but if this is some elaborate plan to get rid of me, You'll what? Lucian interrupted, his lips twitching with the faintest hint of a smile. Lecture me on coffee beans again? Elara's face turned bright red. I didn't mean, Lucian waved her off. Relax. I prefer honesty. Now, come on. Somehow, she found herself seated at one of the most elegant tables in the hotel's five-star restaurant, a table spread with a variety of meticulously crafted dishes. Each plate looked like it belonged in a food magazine, artfully arranged and dripping with opulence. This was not happening. This couldn't be real. Lucian sat across from her, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on her with a seriousness that felt completely out of place, given the situation. All right, try 'em and tell me what you think. Elara stared at the plates, then at him. You want me to eat all this? He cocked an eyebrow. You work double shifts, right? When was the last time you actually ate something? Elara opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. She thought back, trying to remember her last meal. A granola bar sometime yesterday? Or was it the day before? Her silence was answer enough. Lucian's face softened, just for a moment. Exactly. Now eat. Still feeling like she was in some surreal dream, Elara hesitantly picked up a fork and poked at the first dish. A beautifully plated omelet with truffle shavings and a delicate drizzle of hollandaise sauce. It looked like something from a cooking show. She took a bite and immediately made a face. Lucian's eyes sharpened. What's wrong? Elara hesitated, glancing at him nervously. It's nothing. I thought we agreed on honesty, Lucian reminded her, his voice firm but not unkind. Go on, what's wrong with it? She swallowed, her cheeks heating up. It's too salty, and the truffle, it's overwhelming. It tastes like perfume. To her surprise, Lucian didn't look offended. If anything, he looked intrigued. Too salty and perfumed, all right. He made a note on his phone, his fingers moving quickly. Next. Elara's eyes widened. You? You're writing that down? He looked up, his expression serious. Of course, why wouldn't I? She stammered. I just didn't think you'd believe me. Lucian's gaze softened. You're the first person who's been honest about it. The head chef won't listen to anyone who isn't a professional, and the staff are too scared to criticize his dishes. Elara's heart skipped a beat. So, you actually want my opinion? He leaned back, crossing his arms. You pointed out what was wrong with my coffee just by the smell. Now you're telling me exactly what's wrong with this fancy omelet without hesitation? He smirked, his eyes gleaming. You have no idea how valuable that is. Elara looked down at the array of dishes in front of her. For the first time since she walked into that VIP suite, she felt a spark of confidence. Maybe, just maybe, she could do this. She picked up her fork and tried the next dish, and the next, and the next. With each bite, she found her voice, pointing out what tasted off, what was too strong, what was missing. Lucian listened to every word, never interrupting, never questioning her judgment. He just listened. When she finally looked up, her plate empty, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. You're good at this, he said simply. Really good. Elara's cheeks turned pink. I just say what I think. That's exactly why you're good at it. He stood up, his commanding presence making the room feel smaller. Come on, we've got a chef to talk to. Elara's eyes widened. Wait, what? Lucian's lips curved into a half smile. If I'm going to fix this kitchen, I need someone who can tell me what's wrong. He looked at her with a gleam of determination. And that's you, Elara. Her heart skipped a beat. This was insane. Absolutely insane. But then again, so was falling asleep on a billionaire's toilet, and she'd already survived that. The sauce is too acidic, Elara stated, her voice firm and confident. She frowned as she set down her fork, her nose wrinkling in mild distaste. Feels like they used too much lemon to cover up something that went wrong. Lucian's eyes narrowed, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against his chin. Interesting, he murmured, his expression calculating. I had the same suspicion. He gestured toward the next plate. Next. Elara picked up her fork again, spearing a piece of meat. The moment it touched her tongue, she grimaced. Overcooked, tough and dry, and whatever seasoning they used clashes with the sauce. It doesn't belong on this plate. Lucian's lips pressed into a thin line. Figure. Moving on, she took a hesitant bite of a vibrantly colored dish that looked more like an abstract painting than actual food. She chewed thoughtfully before her face twisted in confusion. Is this supposed to be sweet or savory? Because right now, it's just confusing, like it can't make up its mind. Lucian leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and focused. It wasn't just that she noticed the mistakes. She dissected them, pinpointing exactly what went wrong and why. It was like watching a master critic work, only she had no idea how good she was. For the first time in a long while, Lucian was impressed. Elara wiped her mouth, her shoulders slumping. Okay, can I go now? Lucian tilted his head, his gaze never leaving her face. Have you ever thought about working with food? Elara let out a startled laugh. You mean eating bad food? Lucian's eyes sparkled with amusement. No, identifying it. She blinked, her laughter dying in her throat. What? You have a rare talent, he continued, his voice matter-of-fact. Most people wouldn't even catch half the mistakes you just pointed out, let alone explain them so precisely. Elara waved her hand, dismissing the compliment. It's just, I don't know, a silly trick. It doesn't mean anything. Lucian stared at her, his gaze so intense it felt like he was peeling away layers to see straight into her soul. I bet people have told you that before. Elara's heart skipped a beat. How did he? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. He was right. People had always said that. She was just overly picky, too sensitive, or always complaining. No one had ever seen it as anything other than a flaw. Lucian's expression softened, just a fraction. Sometimes the things we think are weaknesses are just strengths that no one else knows how to use yet. Elara's throat tightened. How did he make it sound so simple? Before she could respond, Lucian stood up, his posture radiating authority. He adjusted his shirt sleeves with precise movements, his confidence palpable. Tomorrow morning, you're coming with me to the kitchen. Ellery's eyes widened to the size of saucers. What? Why? I want you to taste a few ingredients, he explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. If you can identify problems this easily, I want to know what you can do before the dishes even get to the plate. Elara felt a cold sweat break out on her back. No. I'm just a cleaning lady. I don't belong in the kitchen. Lucian raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a faint smile. You don't think you belong anywhere other than cleaning, do you? Elara's face flushed with embarrassment. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. I don't know how to do anything else. Lucian's expression softened, his eyes gentle but firm. Well, tomorrow, we'll find out if that's true or not. Elara shook her head vigorously. No, absolutely not. I'm not doing it. I'll probably mess everything up. I'll ruin it. Lucian shrugged, his demeanor unbothered. You've already ruined my peace and quiet, so how much worse could it get? Her mouth fell open in shock, her face turning crimson. I didn't mean to. Lucien's eyes sparkled with mischief. Relax, I'm kidding. He leaned in, his voice lowering. But I'm not kidding about tomorrow. Meet me in the kitchen at 8 a.m. Elara's heart sank. But what if I don't show up? Lucian smirked, his confidence unshakable. I know where you work, Elara, and I don't give up that easily. Elara gaped at him, her mind spinning. Are you insane? For the first time since she'd met him, Lucian laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that lit up his face and made him look almost human. Not yet, but give it time. With that, he turned and walked away, his long strides confident and purposeful. Elara sat frozen, her mouth hanging open. She looked down at the remnants of the fancy dishes in front of her, her mind reeling. What just happened? How did she go from cleaning toilets to tasting dishes for the CEO? Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup, her knuckles turning white. This was madness, pure, absolute madness. And yet, there was a tiny spark inside her chest, a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, she was meant for more than just cleaning. As she stood up, her legs wobbling beneath her, Elara realized she'd be at that kitchen at 8 a.m. tomorrow. She didn't have a choice. Because Lucian Scott wasn't just insane, he was also stubborn. And apparently, so was she. Elara spent the entire night tossing and turning, her mind a chaotic swirl of disbelief and anxiety. She should have been fired. Any reasonable boss would have kicked her out of the hotel the moment they found her drooling on the toilet lid in a VIP suite. But somehow, not only did she still have her job, she was now embroiled in some bizarre plan to fix the hotel's breakfast. Did it make sense? Absolutely not. Did she want to be involved? Also absolutely not. But Lucian Scott didn't seem like the kind of man who took no for an answer. His eyes had that intense, unwavering resolve that made her stomach twist with dread. So the next morning, there she was, stumbling into the hotel kitchen, bleary-eyed and exhausted, praying that she wouldn't do anything to get herself officially fired this time. She pushed open the heavy kitchen door and was immediately met with the bustling sounds of chopping, sizzling, and the hum of industrial appliances. Stainless steel gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the air was thick with the scents of freshly baked bread, spices, and brewing coffee. Lucian stood near the center of the organized chaos, his posture calm and composed as if he were merely observing the weather. Beside him was the head chef, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating an aura of authority. The man looked like he could chop a tree down with his bare hands. The moment Lucian's eyes landed on her, his jaw tightened. He glanced at his watch, then fixed her with a pointed stare. "You're late," Elara groaned, rubbing her tired eyes. "If you're going to fire me, just do it now. I only got 3 hours of sleep." Lucian's lips curved into a slight smirk. "You'll survive now. Come here." The head chef turned, his sharp eyes narrowing as they landed on her. He looked her up and down, his expression radiating skepticism. "This is the cleaning lady?" His arms crossed over his chest, muscles bulging under his chef's coat. "What is she doing in my kitchen?" "Saving the hotel's breakfast," Lucian replied flatly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Dorian's face darkened, his eyebrows knitting together. "With all due respect, Mr. Scott, my team is highly trained. I don't think we need a cleaner's opinion." Elara's stomach dropped. She already felt out of place, standing there in her faded uniform, surrounded by polished chefs in pristine whites. And now she had to deal with a head chef who clearly saw her as a joke. Lucian didn't so much as blink. His voice was calm, almost bored. "I tasted the food yesterday. If your team were as qualified as you say, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The kitchen went deathly silent. Elara swore she heard the faint clatter of a spoon being dropped somewhere in the background. Dorian's jaw tightened, his nostrils flaring. It was clear that Lucian's words had struck a nerve. "What exactly does Miss Collins have to say about my kitchen?" His voice was low and icy, dripping with contempt. Lucian's expression remained neutral as he gestured toward Elara. "Find out for yourself." Elara felt her blood turn to ice. "Wait, what?" Lucian crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "You were honest about the coffee, now I want you to be honest about everything else." He tilted his head toward the counter, where several dishes had been laid out. "Go on, tell us what's wrong." Dorian let out a harsh, sarcastic laugh, his eyes blazing with irritation. "Wonderful. Let's hear what the mop expert has to say about fine dining." Elara's face burned with humiliation. She wanted to crawl under the counter and hide forever. What was she supposed to do now? But then she looked at Lucian. His expression was completely serious, his eyes locked on hers. He was giving her a chance to prove herself. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, but she forced herself to step forward, her hands trembling as she picked up the first plate. It was a beautifully plated Eggs Benedict, the hollandaise sauce gleaming under the lights. She took a hesitant bite, feeling all eyes on her. Her face immediately twisted in discomfort. The sauce is too acidic. It feels like they used too much lemon to cover up something that went wrong with the base. Lucian's eyes lit up, his lips curving into a satisfied smile. I thought so. Dorian's face tightened, his eyes narrowing. Too acidic? He echoed, his tone dripping with skepticism. Are you sure your taste buds are that refined? Elara swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the fork. I'm sure. It's not balanced. The lemon is overpowering everything else. It feels like they were trying to hide a mistake. Dorian's jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with frustration. But Lucian looked positively thrilled. Next. She moved to the next plate, cutting into a perfectly seared steak. She chewed slowly, her nose wrinkling. It's overcooked, and the seasoning is all wrong. It doesn't match the sauce, it's fighting against it instead of complementing it. Dorian's face turned an alarming shade of red, his fists clenched at his sides. Overcooked? We use the finest cuts of meat and the most precise temperatures. Lucian cut him off, and yet it's wrong. He turned to Elara, his eyes gleaming with intrigue. Keep going. Elara moved to a vibrant dish of sweet and savory crepes, her fork hesitating before she took a bite, her face twisted in confusion. Is this supposed to be sweet or savory? Because right now, it's just confusing. It feels like it can't decide what it wants to be. Lucian's expression was a mixture of satisfaction and admiration. Exactly what I was thinking. Dorian's face was a mask of fury, his shoulders rigid. This is ridiculous. You're taking the word of a cleaner over my team of professional chefs? Lucian's demeanor turned cold, his eyes like steel. I'm taking the word of someone who's honest enough to say what's wrong instead of pretending everything's perfect. He took a step closer to Dorian, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. If you want to prove her wrong, then fix the mistakes. Otherwise, keep quiet. Dorian's mouth snapped shut, his fists still clenched, his body trembling with barely restrained anger. Lucian turned back to Elara, his face softening. You did well. Better than I expected. Elara's eyes widened. I did? Lucian's lips curved into a faint smile. I knew you were good, but I didn't expect you to be this good. Dorian looked like he was about to explode, but Lucian ignored him, his attention solely on Elara. Tomorrow, we're tasting the lunch menu. Be here at 10 a.m. Elara's jaw dropped. Wait, what? Lucian's eyes sparkled with determination. This isn't a one-time thing, Elara. If we're going to fix this, we're doing it right. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low whisper. And I don't take no for an answer. Elara's heart raced, her knees weak. She didn't know how she'd ended up here or how she'd survive tomorrow. But one thing was certain, Lucian Scott was far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. And there was no escaping him now. Elara's face burned with irritation. What an insufferable man. But if Lucian Scott wanted a show, she was more than willing to give him one. She straightened her shoulders, forcing her nerves into submission. Taking a steadying breath, she picked up a spoon and dipped it into the first dish, a plate of scrambled eggs that looked deceptively golden and fluffy. She tasted a bite, letting the flavors settle on her tongue before her expression darkened. The scrambled eggs are dry, she stated, her voice firm and clear. You used low-quality butter and the salt is uneven. It tastes inconsistent. Dorian's nostrils flared, but his posture didn't waver. He crossed his arms, his biceps bulging under his chef's coat. What else? He challenged, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Elara didn't hesitate. She picked up a piece of bread, examining it before taking a bite, her face scrunched in disappointment. The bread isn't fresh. It was either baked yesterday or stored poorly. It's lost its texture, stale and chewy. Dorian's jaw tightened, but he merely grunted, his arms still crossed. All right. And the juice? Elara reached for the glass, the vibrant orange liquid almost glowing under the kitchen lights. She took a cautious sip and immediately regretted it. Her lips puckered as she fought the urge to spit it out. This is a disaster? Dorian's eyebrow arched, his skepticism palpable. A disaster? Really? And why is that? Elara didn't miss a beat. Because someone mixed fresh orange juice with store-bought concentrate and topped it off with a generous dose of disappointment. Lucian's lips twitched, his eyes sparkling with barely contained amusement. He quickly composed himself, but the hint of a smile was there. Dorian, on the other hand, looked like he was about to explode, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. Dorian's voice was low and clipped. "All right, Miss Collins, if you're so smart, what do you suggest?" Elara paused, her eyes flicking to Lucian. "Can I speak freely or am I risking my life here?" Lucian's mouth curved into a sly grin. "Speak freely?" Elara turned back to Dorian, her eyes steely with determination. "This is a 5-star hotel. Guests expect high-quality food, not something that tastes like it came from an airport cafeteria." She gestured at the plates. "If you want my honest opinion, you need to upgrade the ingredients. Use real butter, fresh bread, and eggs from local farms." Dorian's jaw clenched, his teeth grinding audibly. "That costs money." Elara's eyes narrowed. "And bad food costs customers." Dorian's face turned a shade of red that almost matched his chef's coat. Lucian, however, looked positively delighted, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Then it's settled," Lucian declared, his voice calm but decisive. "We'll test Miss Collins' suggestions." Dorian's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "This is an insult. I have years of experience, and this girl was cleaning toilets yesterday." Lucian shrugged, his expression unbothered. "And yeah, she pointed out every flaw on your breakfast menu in under 5 minutes. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a dangerously low tone. "Remind me again why I pay you so much?" Dorian's mouth snapped shut, his face hardening. His fists tightened at his sides, but he didn't dare argue. Lucian turned back to Elara, his eyes softening. "Well done, Elara." Elara's eyes widened, her heart stuttering. I was just honest." "And that's exactly why you're valuable," Lucian replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Honesty is hard to come by, and you don't sugarcoat anything. I like that." Elara's cheeks burned. Was he complimenting her after everything that happened? Lucian's expression softened just a fraction. "Go get some rest. You've earned it." Elara's jaw dropped. "Wait, you're letting me go?" Lucian's lips twitched. "I'm not a monster, Elara. You're exhausted, and I need you alert tomorrow morning." Elara's heart skipped a beat. "Tomorrow?" Lucian's eyes gleamed with a mixture of amusement and determination. "Oh, did I forget to mention, we're going through the lunch menu next. Be here at 10 a.m. sharp." Elara's face paled. "You want me to do this again?" Lucian's grin widened. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for someone who could be honest with me. Consider yourself drafted." Elara opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Her mind spun as she tried to process everything. She was supposed to be cleaning bathrooms, not critiquing 5-star menus. This was insane. But then she looked at Lucian, his eyes bright with excitement and intrigue, and somehow, she knew she wasn't getting out of this. She let out a resigned sigh. "Fine, but if this backfires, I'll take the blame," Lucian assured her, his tone unwavering. "But I have a feeling it won't." Elara shook her head, her shoulders slumping. "You're crazy." Lucian's laughter was warm, his eyes sparkling. "I've been called worse." As she turned to leave, she heard Dorian mutter under his breath. "This is absurd." Lucian's voice was cold and sharp. "Absurd is serving subpar food at a 5-star hotel. If you want to keep your job, I suggest you listen to what she has to say." Dorian's face turned pale, his mouth clamping shut. Elara felt a chill run down her spine. Lucian Scott was ruthless when he wanted to be. She was in way over her head, but for some reason, she wasn't as terrified as she should have been. As she walked out of the kitchen, her legs wobbly from exhaustion and adrenaline, she realized one thing: she wasn't fired. She was just getting started. Elara left the restaurant feeling like she had just run a marathon. Her legs were shaky, her heart was still racing, and her brain felt like it had been put through a blender. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had done something that mattered, even if it was just fixing breakfast. As she made her way back to the laundry room, her mind replayed the events of the morning. She had stood up to the head chef. She had argued with Lucian Scott, of all people, and she had actually made a difference. Her fingers tingled with leftover adrenaline, and she couldn't help the small smile that crept onto her face. But her moment of peace was short-lived. The door to the laundry room burst open, and Celine skidded inside, her face flushed, her hair flying wildly. "Elara!" Elara looked up from the pile of sheets she was folding. "What's wrong? You look like you just saw a ghost." Celine's eyes were wide with excitement. "People are talking about you all over the hotel. They're saying you humiliated the chef in front of the CEO. Elara winced. "I didn't humiliate him, I just told the truth." Celine gaped at her, as if Elara had just admitted to kicking a puppy. "And he let you walk out alive?" Elara shrugged, her shoulders aching from the tension. "More or less." Before she could continue, Celine's hands clamped down on her shoulders, shaking her with surprising strength. "Are you sleeping with him?" Elara choked on her own saliva, her face turning bright red. "What? No! Are you out of your mind?" Celine's eyes were as wide as saucers. "People are saying the CEO promoted you because you're having an affair with him." Elara felt her stomach drop, a wave of nausea washing over her. "I'm going to bury myself under these sheets and never come out." Celine crossed her arms, her eyebrows raised. "Well, that's what you get for breaking every hotel rule in a single morning." Elara opened her mouth to defend herself, but the door swung open again and she immediately snapped her mouth shut. Standing in the doorway was Dorian, the head chef. Elara's heart stopped. His face was neutral, his posture stiff. "Miss Collins." Elara swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. Hi?" Dorian hesitated, his jaw tightening, before he let out a heavy sigh. "I wanted to say that I was an idiot this morning." Elara blinked, completely blindsided. Dorian's shoulders sagged, the proud head chef looking oddly vulnerable. "You were right. We changed the breakfast ingredients like you suggested, and the guests loved it. We've gotten more compliments today than we have in the past month." Elara's jaw went slack. Was she hearing this right? Was Dorian apologizing? Dorian's face flushed, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I was stubborn, and I was wrong. You have a good eye for food, better than I expected." He held out his hand, his eyes finally meeting hers. "I'd like to ask for your help again. Can I count on your opinion when we try new dishes?" Elara's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at Celine, whose eyes were as wide as saucers, her mouth hanging open in shock. This morning, she had been worried about losing her job, and now the head chef was asking for her help? Elara took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she reached out and shook his hand. "As long as I don't have to wash the dishes afterward." Dorian's face broke into a grin, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Deal." Celine's hand flew to her mouth, barely containing a squeal of excitement. Elara released his hand, her mind still reeling. I don't really know how to help, I'd just say what I think." Dorian's expression softened. "That's exactly what we need. Honesty is hard to come by, especially in a kitchen." He glanced at her pile of sheets, his eyes crinkling. "You don't belong here, you know. You're wasted in the laundry room." Elara's face turned pink. I never thought about it." Dorian's smile widened. "Well, think about it now. I'll see you tomorrow, Collins." With a nod, he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The moment the door shut, Celine grabbed Elara's arm, her eyes wild. "Did that really just happen? Did you just make friends with the head chef?" Elara sank onto the pile of sheets, her legs giving out. I have no idea what's happening anymore." Celine's eyes sparkled with excitement. "You do realize what this means, right?" Elara looked at her, still dazed. "That I won't get fired?" Celine laughed, shaking her head. "You're not just keeping your job, you're moving up. You're going to be tasting food for the head chef. You're practically his right-hand woman now." Elara's heart raced, her thoughts swirling. "But I don't know anything about being a food critic." Celine grinned. "You don't have to. You just have to do what you did this morning. Tell the truth. Besides, if you're working with Dorian, you'll learn everything you need to know." Elara's head spun. She had just stumbled into a new role at the hotel, a role she hadn't even known existed, and she had no idea where it would lead. But one thing was certain, her life was never going to be the same again. Elara still couldn't wrap her mind around the whirlwind of the morning. Somehow a simple housekeeping staff member, who had, embarrassingly, been caught napping on the CEO's toilet lid, had not only survived the ordeal but had also become someone whose opinion mattered. It was as if she had slipped into an alternate universe where truth-telling about bad coffee could transform her life. But with this newfound position came the rumors, and oh boy did they spread fast. What started as Elara slept in the CEO's bathroom quickly twisted into Elara and the CEO had a private moment in the bathroom. By lunchtime, it had spiraled into Elara is having a secret affair with the boss and now has free access to the kitchen. She did her best to ignore the whispers, the sideways glances, and the barely hidden smirks as she went about her work. But the hotel's hallways felt narrower, the walls closing in as speculation echoed around her. While changing sheets in one of the guest rooms, she heard the unmistakable voice of Lilith, the receptionist known for her sharp tongue and sharper gossip. "So, you're the hotel's new favorite now?" Elara closed her eyes for a brief moment, summoning all the patience she had left. She turned slowly, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm the new official tester of bad food, that's all." Lilith leaned against the doorframe, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically on her crossed arms. "Funny. No one has ever been promoted this fast in this hotel. You must have done something really special to get Mr. Scott's attention like that." Elara's jaw tightened. "Do I need to spell it out for you? I fell asleep in his bathroom. Instead of firing me, he made me drink terrible coffee. That's the whole story." Lilith's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched skeptically. "Sure. I'm sure that's all it was." Elara took a slow, measured breath. "I'd love to stay and chat about your conspiracy theories, but I actually have work to do." She gripped the handle of her cleaning cart and pushed it past Lilith, determined to keep her dignity intact. The truth was, all Elara wanted was for things to go back to normal. She wanted to be invisible again, to clean rooms without feeling the weight of 100 curious stares. Maybe if she stayed out of sight long enough, Lucian would forget about his ridiculous plan to have her taste more dishes. But deep down, she knew better. Lucian Scott didn't seem like the kind of man who forgot anything. Her suspicion was confirmed later that afternoon just as she was clocking out. Her phone buzzed and she opened a message from Celine. "Chef Dorian wants to talk to you in the kitchen. You'd better go before he throws you into the soup pot." Elara groaned, her shoulders slumping. "This never ends." When she reached the kitchen, Dorian stood near the entrance, his arms crossed. But his expression wasn't as severe as before. If anything, he looked almost amused. "Mr. Scott wants to see you in the restaurant, now." Elara let out a long, weary sigh. "Does he ever get tired?" Dorian's lips twitched into a smirk. "You're still breathing, so I guess not." Elara couldn't help but snort. "Good to know my continued existence is his sign of endurance." Dorian's smirk widened, and for a moment, Elara thought she saw a glimmer of respect in his eyes. Better not keep him waiting. He's in one of his visionary moods. "Great," she muttered, dragging her feet as she walked toward the restaurant. "Just what I needed." Her mind raced with possibilities. What now? Was he going to make her test the lunch menu, or perhaps the dinner service? Was he going to interrogate her about the rumors? Or worse, had someone convinced him that she really was spreading lies about an affair? As she approached the restaurant, she took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Whatever awaited her, she would face it head-on. Because if there was one thing she had learned in the past 24 hours, it was that surviving Lucian Scott required both courage and a very thick skin. And she was getting better at both. Resigned to her fate, Elara trudged her way to the restaurant, silently cursing Lucian Scott and his insatiable curiosity. What now? Was he going to ask her to taste the entire lunch menu? Did he want her opinion on napkin textures? As she stepped inside, she found Lucian seated at a table near the window, his posture relaxed, but his expression laser-focused as he studied a menu with the intensity of someone making high-stakes stock market decisions. Without waiting for an invitation, Elara pulled out a chair and dropped into it, crossing her arms. "I should start charging for these consultations." Lucian looked up, his lips twitching in amusement. "Very funny. I try, she deadpanned, leaning back and pretending to make herself comfortable. So, what now? Is the table salt not good enough for your taste? Lucian ignored her sarcasm, setting the menu aside and leveling her with a steady gaze. I have a proposal for you. Elara's eyes narrowed. That doesn't sound good. You'll like it. I doubt it. Lucian's mouth curved into a half-smile, but his eyes remained serious. There's a major food event happening in Paris next week, one of the biggest in the world. Elara raised an eyebrow, waiting for the punchline. Okay, and? And I want you to come with me. Elara's jaw dropped. She blinked once, twice. What? You heard me, Lucian repeated, his voice calm and steady. I want you to come with me. She let out a laugh, the absurdity of the situation hitting her all at once. Wait, you want me to go with you to some fancy food event in Paris? Exactly. Elara laughed even harder, doubling over as her shoulders shook. I'm a housekeeper, Scott. I clean rooms and scrub toilets. You want me to fly to Paris just to tell you if a dish is bad? Lucian leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. You have a special talent, a refined palate, something most people don't have. I want you to help me identify the best chefs and the finest ingredients. Elara's laughter died as she stared at him, her mouth hanging open. He was serious. Dead serious. I don't even know where to start with how crazy this is. First of all, I shouldn't even be here. Second, who says I actually know what I'm doing? Lucian's expression softened, his eyes unwavering. I do. Elara's heart skipped a beat. You? Trust me? Just like that? Lucian leaned back, his shoulders relaxing. I trust my instincts, and my instincts tell me you're the real deal. Elara's face turned bright red. I don't have the first clue about fancy food events. I wouldn't even know which fork to use. Lucien's lips curved into a smirk. That's the best part. You won't be blinded by pretentious presentations or celebrity reputations. You'll see the food for what it is, and that's exactly what I need. Elara swallowed, her mind racing. Why me? Why not a professional critic? Because they're too jaded, Lucian answered without hesitation. They look for flaws to prove how clever they are. You look for the truth. And you don't care who hears it. Elara's heart pounded in her chest. But Paris? I don't even have a passport. Lucian's eyes sparkled with determination. I'll take care of it. Everything. Flights, hotel, paperwork. You won't have to worry about a thing. Elara's pulse quickened. This is insane. Completely insane. Lucian's gaze softened. I know it's overwhelming, but you've got a gift, Elara, and you're wasting it here. Elara's throat tightened. I'm just a housekeeper. Lucian shook his head, his voice firm. No. You're a diamond in the rough, and I won't let you keep hiding under a pile of laundry. Elara's vision blurred as a wave of emotions crashed over her. Fear, excitement, disbelief. You're serious? You really believe in me? Lucian's expression softened, his eyes warm. I've never been more serious about anything. Elara looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it was also terrifying. What if I mess up? Lucian's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. Then we'll figure it out together. Elara felt her heart skip. Together. This wasn't just about food. This was about trust, about possibility, about stepping into a world she never thought she'd be part of. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and uncertain. I don't know what to say. Lucian leaned back, his demeanor casual but his eyes serious. Say yes. Elara opened her mouth, her voice trembling. Yes, I'll go. Lucian's smile widened, his eyes sparkling with satisfaction. Good. Pack your bags, Elara Collins. We're going to Paris. Elara opened her mouth to argue, to tell him all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. But the conviction in Lucian's eyes stopped her cold. He believed in her. He truly, genuinely believed she was good at this, and that terrified her more than anything else. I can't accept, she blurted out, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound firm. Lucian's brow furrowed, confusion flashing across his face. Why not? Because it's ridiculous, she stammered, her fingers nervously twisting in her lap. "I don't know anything about these events. I wouldn't fit in. I don't even own a decent dress, let alone know how to act around people like you." Lucian's expression softened. "You don't have to know everything. I didn't either the first time I went." Elara scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "That's different. You're a CEO. You're someone important. You were born for this." Lucian's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "You think I was born into this life?" He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "I grew up with nothing. I worked my way up from the bottom, and the first time I went to one of these events, I was terrified." Elara blinked, stunned by his admission. She had never considered that someone like Lucian Scott could feel fear. "But you have a gift, a talent for this. You belong in that world." Lucian shook his head, his eyes locked on hers. "And so do you. You have a gift, Elara, a talent that can't be taught." Elara's breath caught in her throat. Had anyone ever said something like that to her before? Had anyone ever believed she was truly good at something? She lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting tighter. I don't belong in your world. I have a job here. People depend on me. I can't just leave." "I'll pay you twice what you make at the hotel," Lucian said without hesitation. Elara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What? It's only fair, considering you'll be helping me," Lucian continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "You'll be working, not vacationing. I'll cover all the expenses, and you'll be compensated for your time. Twice what you make here." Elara stared at him, her mind spinning. Twice her salary? That would be enough to catch up on her rent, to pay off her overdue bills, maybe even enough to finally buy new shoes that didn't pinch her toes. But Paris? It was insane. The whole thing was insane. "I can't just drop everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to," Lucian replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's just a 3-day trip. You'll be back before you know it." Elara bit her lip, her heart pounding. It was tempting, so tempting, but it also felt like she was stepping into something she couldn't control, something that could change everything. I don't know. This feels like a trap?" Lucian's lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "A trap?" Elara flushed, heat rushing to her cheeks. "I mean, I don't get it. Why me? You could take anyone, an expert, a critic, someone who actually knows what they're doing. Why take a housekeeper who doesn't even own a pair of heels?" Lucian's expression softened, his voice dropping to a gentle tone. "Because you see things other people don't. You notice details, you're brutally honest, and you don't care about appearances. That's exactly what I need." Elara's heart skipped a beat. "You really believe that?" "I do," Lucian said firmly, his eyes unwavering. "I trust my instincts, and my instincts are telling me you're the right person for this." Elara felt her resolve weakening. No one had ever looked at her like that before. With confidence, with trust. No one had ever believed in her potential, let alone offered her a chance to prove herself. But this was so far out of her comfort zone, it was terrifying. I need to think about it," she said, her voice trembling. "This is a lot to process." Lucian's shoulders relaxed, his expression understanding. "That's fine, take your time." His eyes flickered with something she almost mistook for vulnerability. "But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." Elara swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "I know. That's what scares me." Lucian's lips curved into a gentle smile, his eyes warm. "Sometimes the scariest opportunities are the ones that change everything." Elara felt her heart skip, her pulse quickening. She looked away, her fingers twisting in her lap. I should get back to work," Lucian nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "All right, but think about it, Elara. Really think about it." She stood up, her legs shaky as she turned to leave. Just before she walked away, Lucian's voice stopped her. "If you say yes, I promise you won't regret it." Elara's heart stuttered. She didn't look back as she walked out of the restaurant, her mind spinning, her emotions swirling in a chaotic storm. This was crazy, insane, completely out of her depth, But even as she walked away, she couldn't help the small flicker of excitement that sparked inside her chest. Could she really do this? Could she really be more than just a housekeeper? And more importantly, did she dare to find out? Elara left the restaurant feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her heart was racing, her palms were sweaty, and her mind was spinning in 1,000 different directions. Was she really considering this? Was she seriously thinking about traveling to Paris with Lucian Scott? Had she lost her mind? Maybe she had. But she wasn't ready to admit it yet. The rest of the day was a blur. She threw herself into her work with a kind of frantic energy, scrubbing bathroom tiles with more force than necessary, folding bed linens with military precision, vacuuming floors until they practically gleamed. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, his words echoed in her mind, refusing to leave her alone. You have a gift. A refined palate, something most people don't have, her, in Paris. As if she were someone important. As if she were someone who mattered. Every time she thought about it, the most logical explanation jumped to the forefront of her mind. He was messing with her, playing some elaborate, twisted game for his own amusement. What other reason could there possibly be? And yet, when her shift finally ended and she trudged back to her small rented apartment, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders, she couldn't shake the thought. What if he meant it? Collapsing onto her worn-out couch, Elara stared up at the ceiling, her mind spinning. The trip was in 3 days. 3 days. If she said yes, she'd be on a plane with Lucian Scott, heading to a prestigious food event where she'd know absolutely no one. She didn't understand the rules of that world. She didn't belong there. She'd probably make a complete fool of herself. But if she said no, Elara closed her eyes, her chest tightening. If she said no, she'd never know. She'd never find out if there was more to her than just folding sheets and scrubbing toilets. She'd never know if she could be someone more than just the help. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For as long as she could remember, people had looked right through her, seeing only a uniform, only a worker. She was the background character in other people's lives. The one who cleaned up after their messes, but never made a mark of her own. No one had ever looked at her and said, "You're talented, you're special." No one had ever believed in her. Until now, I trust my instincts. And my instincts are telling me, you're the right person for this. Lucian Scott, the CEO, the man who could have hired any professional critic or culinary expert, had chosen her. He had looked her in the eyes and seen something worth taking to Paris, even if he was wrong, even if it was just a mistake. For the first time in her life, Elara wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something inside her that was worth something. Her heart pounded, her fingers trembling as she reached for her phone. She typed out a message, her thumbs hovering over the screen. She hesitated, doubt gnawing at her. Was this really the right decision? But the thought of letting this chance slip away hurt more than the fear of failing. Before she could change her mind, she pressed send. Okay. I'm in. Her heart leapt into her throat, panic rushing through her. She couldn't take it back now. She was actually doing this. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. "Lucian, great, get ready for the trip. I'll handle the rest." Elara let out a long, shaky breath, her fingers going limp. She sank back into the couch, her heart still racing. What on earth was she doing? Was she really going to Paris? 1,000 fears crowded her mind. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassing herself, fear of being out of place. But somewhere underneath all the anxiety was something else. Excitement, hope, and for the first time in her life, Elara Collins felt like maybe, just maybe, she was meant for more. 3 days, just 3 days, and her life would change forever. The day of the trip arrived faster than Elara could have imagined. She woke up before her alarm even had a chance to blare its obnoxious beeping, her heart already racing. Her suitcase lay open on her bed, half-packed with clothes borrowed from Celine, who had insisted on rich-looking attire. "If you're traveling with a billionaire, at least try to look like you belong there," Celine had said with a knowing wink. Elara's hands trembled as she zipped up the bag. Was she really doing this? Was she actually about to board a plane to Paris with Lucian Scott? The thought felt too surreal, like something out of a movie. But her phone buzzed with a message from Lucian, a curt reminder not to be late, and reality crashed down on her like a tidal wave. With sweaty palms and a heart thudding loud enough to drown out her doubts, Elara made her way to the airport. When she entered the VIP lounge, her stomach flipped. Everything was polished to perfection. Marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, plush armchairs and waitstaff dressed in impeccable uniforms offering champagne on silver trays. Lucian was waiting near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his posture relaxed, one hand casually tucked into his pocket. As always, he looked annoyingly perfect. Tailored suit, crisp white shirt, hair effortlessly styled. He looked like he belonged in this world, like he was born to rule it. Meanwhile, Elara felt like a fraud, an imposter, who didn't even belong in this room, let alone on a plane to Paris. Lucian's gaze shifted to her as she approached, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You're on time, that's a miracle." Elara rolled her eyes, trying to hide how nervous she was. "I thought about running away, but my bank account convinced me to stay." Lucian let out a short laugh, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "That's the spirit." Before she could second-guess herself, she was being ushered toward the private departure gate, her heart pounding in her chest. The security check was quick, almost too easy, and then she was walking down the jet bridge, her steps unsteady. But it wasn't just any plane. It was a private jet, sleek, luxurious, and polished to perfection. The interior was all cream-colored leather, glossy mahogany panels, and plush carpeting that sank under her shoes. The seats were wide enough to stretch out and then some, and the windows were so large they made the world outside look like a living postcard. Elara's jaw dropped as she took it all in. "Okay," she said, shaking her head. "This is way nicer than the flying buses I'm used to." Lucian's lips curved into a small smile, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Good to know I'm already impressing you." Elara dropped into one of the wide, impossibly soft seats and sank back with a sigh. "You don't need to impress me, Scott. You just need to make sure I don't embarrass myself in Paris." Lucian's mouth twitched. "No promises." She shot him a glare, her eyes narrowing. "You really enjoy torturing me, don't you?" Lucian leaned back in his seat, his posture relaxed. "One of my favorite pastimes." Elara rolled her eyes, but couldn't help the tiny smile that tugged at her lips. It was strange, this banter between them. He was a billionaire CEO, the kind of man who should have been cold and detached, but he was human, teasing even. The engines roared to life, and Elara's heart skipped a beat as the plane began to taxi down the runway. She gripped the armrests, her fingers tightening instinctively. The jet picked up speed, her body pressing back into the seat as they soared into the sky. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. She was actually flying to Paris with Lucian Scott. Nothing in her life had ever been this surreal. After the seatbelt sign turned off, a flight attendant appeared as if by magic, offering her a menu. Elara's eyes widened as she scanned the options. Caviar, truffle pasta, champagne that cost more than her monthly rent. She looked up, her mouth hanging open. "This is insane!" Lucian didn't look up from his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Get used to it. We'll be eating like this for the next 3 days." Elara swallowed hard, setting the menu down. "I don't even know how to pronounce half of this." Lucian finally looked up, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "You'll learn." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Besides, you have a better palate than most of the so-called food critics who attend these events. You'll do just fine." Elara's heart skipped a beat, warmth flooding her chest. "You really believe that?" Lucian's gaze softened, his voice lowering. "I wouldn't have brought you if I didn't." Elara felt her cheeks heat up. She looked away, her fingers fiddling with the edge of the menu. I don't want to embarrass you." Lucian's lips curved into a half smile. "Trust me, Elara, I'm more worried about you embarrassing yourself." She shot him a glare. "Wow, thanks for the vote of confidence." He chuckled, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "You'll be fine, just be yourself. Honest, brutal, no filter." Elara rolled her eyes. "Great. I'll just pretend I'm back at the hotel, drinking terrible coffee." Lucian's laughter was warm, genuine. "Exactly." The plane cruised smoothly through the clouds, the world below shrinking to tiny dots. Elara leaned back, letting herself sink into the plush leather. She still couldn't believe this was happening. She was going to Paris with Lucian Scott, and for the first time she let herself wonder what could possibly happen next. The hotel looked like something out of a fairy tale. Everything gleamed with opulence, the gold-trimmed furniture, the sparkling chandeliers that seemed to rain light, the plush carpets so soft they muffled her footsteps. Elara felt like she had stepped into a world that existed only in movies, a world so far removed from her reality that she was almost afraid to breathe too hard, worried she might break something just by existing near it. Lucian didn't seem fazed by any of it. He moved through the lobby with the confidence of someone who belonged, his stride purposeful, his expression unbothered. It was as if he couldn't even see the extravagance around him, like it was so normal to him that it didn't warrant a second glance. Meanwhile, Elara felt like an imposter in her borrowed dress and slightly too tight heels. She tried to hold her head high, to walk without wobbling, to look like she belonged. But inside, her nerves were buzzing like a beehive, and the worst was yet to come. That evening, Lucian took her to an exclusive dinner before the main event, a gathering of culinary elites, the kind of people whose names were whispered in reverent tones by chefs and food critics worldwide. The moment they entered the lavish ballroom, Elara felt herself shrinking. The women floated through the room in long, shimmering gowns, their hair perfectly styled, their laughter light and melodic. The men were just as intimidating, dressed in custom-tailored suits, speaking fluent French with the ease of movie stars. Elara felt like a child playing dress-up in her borrowed clothes. She barely understood a word of the elegant French flowing around her, and the champagne glass in her hand felt like a prop she wasn't quite sure how to hold. Meanwhile, Lucian moved through the crowd effortlessly, his confidence radiating from him like an invisible aura. He shook hands with important people, his smile charming, his laugh disarmingly genuine. He was in his element, and watching him navigate this world with such ease only made Elara feel more out of place. She tried to imitate his poise, to keep her head high and her shoulders back, but every time she looked at the dazzling gowns around her, she was painfully aware of her borrowed dress and her scuffed shoes. She was a fraud in this world of wealth and sophistication. But then, her worst fear became reality. "Miss Collins, right?" Elara stiffened, turning to face a middle-aged man with a charming smile. He looked expensive, from his tailored suit to his polished shoes. She forced a smile, trying to sound casual. Yes?" The man's smile widened. "Lucian mentioned you have a special talent for identifying flavors." Elara's eyes widened. Her head snapped around to glare at Lucian, who stood a few feet away, sipping champagne with a look of perfect innocence. That traitor. The man picked up a glass of wine from a nearby waiter's tray and held it out to her. "Would you do me the honor? I'd love to see your talent in action. Tell us, what year is this wine from?" Elara looked at the wine glass as if it were a loaded gun pointed at her. Lucian's lips curved into a wicked smile, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Don't look at me like that. This is part of your job now." Elara's blood boiled. She wanted to smack that smug look off his face, but she was stuck, and there was no escaping this. She was surrounded by people who actually belonged here, all waiting to see what she would do. Gritting her teeth, she took the glass, her fingers trembling. She raised it to her nose and sniffed, feeling her cheeks heat up. She didn't know the first thing about wine, at least nothing sophisticated, but she did know flavors. She took a small sip, letting the wine roll over her tongue. It was strong, full-bodied, with a distinct oaky flavor. But there was also something fresh about it, a fruity note that stood out. Her mind raced, connecting the dots. It was bold but youthful, the oakiness not fully matured. Before she could stop herself, she blurted out, "This was aged in oak barrels, but there's a fruity note. It must be a recent vintage, maybe 3 years old?" The man's eyes widened, his expression one of genuine surprise. "Exactly." Elara froze, her heart stopping mid-beat. "What?" The man's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with admiration. "You got it right. It's a 3-year vintage, aged in French oak barrels. Very few people pick up on that without training." Elara's mouth fell open. I was right?" Lucian stepped closer, his expression smug and satisfied. "See? I told you were good at this." Elara looked down at the glass, her fingers tightening around the stem. She had actually gotten it right. She had tasted something and understood it in a way that impressed someone who clearly knew what they were talking about. For the first time that night, she felt a flicker of confidence. Maybe she did have a knack for this. Maybe she wasn't such a fraud after all. Lucian leaned in, his voice low and teasing. You look like you've just discovered the secret to the universe. Elara shot him a glare, her lips curving into a reluctant smile. Shut up, Scott. Lucian's laughter was warm, his eyes gleaming with genuine delight. If this is you on your first night, I can't wait to see what you do at the main event. Elara's heart skipped a beat, excitement bubbling up inside her. Maybe this wasn't such a mistake after all. She looked around the room, at the people who seemed so untouchable just moments before. She still didn't belong here. Not really. But maybe she didn't have to belong. Maybe she just had to be herself. She looked back at Lucian, her eyes blazing with determination. Fine. I'll play along. But if I embarrass you, it's your own fault. Lucian's smile widened, his eyes dancing with mischief. I wouldn't have it any other way. Elara's heart raced, her nerves fading as excitement took over. She was in Paris, surrounded by the culinary elite, about to take on a world she never thought she'd see. And for the first time, she was ready to see what she was truly capable of. The dinner continued with Elara being introduced to more and more people, renowned chefs, food critics, and industry insiders who looked at her with curiosity and intrigue. Each time she was handed a new dish to taste, her heart would race, her palms would sweat, but then she'd close her eyes, let the flavors sink in, and simply say what she thought. And each time, she got it right. She identified herbs, spices, cooking techniques, and even the quality of the ingredients with a precision that left people staring in awe. At first, she was terrified, but with every nod of approval and every raised eyebrow of respect, her confidence grew just a little more. By the end of the night, she was smiling, genuinely smiling, as she navigated conversations with people she never dreamed she'd speak to. Lucian stayed close by, his eyes never far from her, his expression unreadable. As they made their way back to the hotel, the cool night air washing over them, Lucian turned to her, his lips curving into an amused smile. I admit it, you surprised me. Elara scoffed, her cheeks still flushed from all the praise she'd received. I surprised myself. Lucian stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his hands in his pockets as he tilted his head. So, still think you don't belong in this world? Elara looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. For the first time, she didn't know how to answer. Did she belong here, in this world of sophistication and luxury? For so long, she had believed that she was meant to be invisible, just another faceless worker cleaning up after people who actually mattered. But tonight she had stood beside Lucian Scott, tasted dishes crafted by the best chefs in the world, and she had held her own. Maybe she did belong. Maybe she did spend too much time thinking she wasn't good enough. Lucian studied her face, his eyes lingering on her as if trying to read her thoughts. After a moment, he gave her a small, almost gentle smile. You've got talent, Collins, and now that I know that, I'm not letting you slip away. A shiver ran through Elara, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. There was a certainty in his voice, a determination that sent a thrill down her spine. Lucian Scott never said anything by accident, and suddenly she realized this trip could change everything. Not just her job, not just her career, everything. Underscore 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 underscore. Elara woke up the next morning feeling like she was still dreaming. She opened her eyes slowly, the sunlight streaming through the luxurious curtains, the sheets softer than anything she had ever slept on before. For a moment, she forgot where she was. But then the events of the night before came rushing back, and she sat up abruptly, her heart racing. She was in Paris, in a 5-star hotel, traveling with Lucian Scott, the billionaire CEO who, for some inexplicable reason, thought she had talent. If someone had told her that a week ago, she would have laughed in their face and told them to get help. But here she was, lying in the most comfortable bed she had ever slept in, staring at the ceiling, and trying to figure out how her life had flipped upside down so quickly. Sighing, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and padded over to the window. Pulling the curtains back, she was met with a view that took her breath away. Historic buildings stretched out before her, their elegant facades lined with ornate balconies, the streets bustling with life. Down below, charming cafes were already serving breakfast, the smell of freshly baked croissants and rich coffee drifting up to her window. Everything looked like it came straight out of a movie. And she, Elara Collins, was right there in the middle of it all. A notification sound snapped her out of her trance. She grabbed her phone and saw a message from Lucian. Lucian, breakfast at 8. Don't be late. Elara rolled her eyes, a smile tugging at her lips. Of course, he was already up and ready. Did the man ever sleep? But despite her mental complaints, she hurried to get ready, taking a quick shower and slipping into the nicest outfit she had borrowed from Celine. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant enough to blend in, hopefully. When she made her way downstairs to the hotel's restaurant, she spotted Lucian right away. He was seated at a corner table, dressed impeccably as always, his posture relaxed as he scrolled through his phone. Elara approached the table, a playful smile on her lips. "Do you always arrive first everywhere?" Lucian looked up, his eyes gleaming with amusement. Some call it punctuality, others call it efficiency. Elara dropped into the seat across from him, picking up the menu. "And I call it unbearable." Lucian chuckled, a rich, warm sound that made her heart skip a beat. "You're full of compliments this morning." The waiter approached, and Lucian ordered a black coffee, his voice calm and confident. Elara, however, opted for a croissant and hot chocolate. Lucian raised an eyebrow. "No coffee?" Elara grinned, her eyes sparkling. "I like coffee, but we're in Paris. Hot chocolate here is practically a work of art." Lucian leaned back, his eyes studying her thoughtfully. "You really do take food seriously." Elara took her first sip of the hot chocolate, her eyes fluttering shut as a sigh of pure bliss escaped her lips. "My God, this is good." Lucian shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. "I see now why I brought you along." Elara's eyes sparkled with mischief. "You brought me here to drink hot chocolate?" "No," Lucian said, his voice low and serious. "I brought you here to see the world through your eyes." Elara's heart skipped a beat, her cheeks flushing. She looked away, trying to hide her embarrassment. "You're being dramatic." Lucian leaned forward, his voice dropping. "No, I'm being honest." They finished breakfast without rushing, the conversation flowing easily. For the first time, being around Lucian didn't feel strange or uncomfortable. It felt natural. When they were done, Lucian stood up, slipping his phone into his pocket. "We've got a busy day ahead." Elara's eyes widened. "What's on the agenda?" He smirked, his eyes gleaming. "Food. We'll be doing tastings with some of the best chefs in France." Elara's jaw dropped. "You mean I have to taste their food and criticize it?" Lucian's smile widened. "That's exactly what you're here for." Elara's nerves returned, her heart pounding. "This sounds—" "You'll survive," Lucian teased, his eyes sparkling with amusement. Elara took a deep breath, her pulse racing. "I guess there's no turning back now." Lucian's eyes softened. "No, but you wouldn't want to, anyway." Elara looked up at him, her fear melting away. "You're right, I wouldn't." With that, she followed him out of the restaurant, ready to face whatever the day had in store, because for the first time she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The tastings were held in an exclusive, elegantly decorated room at the food event, a space reserved for the culinary elite. Renowned chefs from all over the world showcased their finest creations, presenting dishes that looked more like art than food. Elara's heart was in her throat when she stepped inside. The room buzzed with sophistication. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, carrying trays with intricate dishes and fine wines, while elegantly dressed guests exchanged compliments and critiques in multiple languages. She felt like an intruder, like she didn't belong. But then Lucian's voice cut through her nerves, calm and steady. "You ready?" She swallowed hard, nodding even though she was anything but ready. "Yeah, let's do this." The first dish was placed before her, delicately plated with such precision that she was almost afraid to touch it. But she remembered what Lucian had told her. Just be yourself, honest, brutal, no filter. So she did. She tasted the food, letting the flavors settle on her tongue. She noticed the delicate balance of spices, the texture of the vegetables, the way the sauce complemented the main ingredient. But she also noticed the flaws, the slight overcooking, the touch too much acidity, the overuse of garnish that distracted from the main flavors. And to her own amazement, she spoke up. She pointed out the minor mistakes, identified secret ingredients, and even suggested small adjustments that made the chefs pause and consider her words. Some raised their eyebrows in surprise, others smiled, intrigued by her observations. One even took out a notepad and jotted down her suggestions. With each plate, Elara grew more confident. The fear faded, replaced by a sense of purpose she had never felt before. She didn't just belong here, she was thriving. Lucian watched her the entire time, his gaze unwavering. There was a look of satisfaction on his face, but also curiosity, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. When the event finally ended, they walked through the grand hall, the echoes of laughter and clinking glasses fading behind them. Elara felt light, almost euphoric. She had done it. She hadn't just survived, she had succeeded. But her moment of triumph was cut short when an elegant woman approached, her movements smooth and graceful, her smile radiating absolute confidence. She was tall and stunningly beautiful, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her tight, expensive dress hugging every curve like it was made just for her. Elara didn't know who she was, but she recognized the type immediately. Someone who belonged in Lucian's world. Someone who didn't have to borrow clothes just to fit in. "Lucian Scott," the woman said, her voice a smooth purr. "Long time no see." Lucian's face shifted into a polite smile, but his eyes remained guarded. "Lyra, didn't expect to see you here." Lyra's lips curved into a cat-like grin. "Paris is my second home, darling." Her gaze slid over to Elara, her eyes sweeping over her from head to toe in one calculating glance. "And you?" Her voice dripped with curiosity. "Got yourself some new company?" Elara felt a shiver run down her spine. The way Lyra looked at her made her feel exposed, like she was being evaluated and found lacking. Lucian's voice was casual, his expression calm. "Elara Collins, she's working with me." Lyra's smile didn't waver, but Elara saw the spark of disdain in her eyes. "Oh, how interesting." Her voice was sweet, but the sharpness beneath it was unmistakable. "And how exactly is she working with you?" Elara's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what that question implied. Lucian's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with irritation. "Elara has a special talent for flavors. She's helping me evaluate the dishes at the event." Lyra's eyes widened, her eyebrows arching in exaggerated surprise. "How curious. I could have sworn she was, well, something completely different." Elara felt heat rush to her face, embarrassment mixing with anger. She knew what Lyra was implying, and it made her blood boil. Lucian's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. He stepped closer to Elara, his hand resting gently on her back, a subtle but protective gesture. "It was good to see you, Lyra," he said, his tone cold and final. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." Lyra's smile faltered for just a second before she regained her composure. "Of course, take care, Lucian." She threw one last lingering glance at Elara before turning on her heel and walking away, her head held high. Elara let out the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her shoulders sagging. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding. Lucian turned to her, his eyes softening. "Ignore it." Elara crossed her arms, her mouth tightening. "You heard what she was implying, right?" Lucian's jaw clenched. "Yes, and it was complete nonsense." Elara shook her head, her anger giving way to bitterness. "People are always going to think that about me. No matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, people like her are always going to see me as an outsider." Lucian's expression hardened, his eyes blazing with determination. "You don't owe them anything, least of all an explanation." Elara looked away, her eyes stinging. "Easy for you to say. You're a billionaire. You grew up in this world. People respect you." Lucian's face darkened, a shadow passing over his features. "You think I grew up in this world?" His voice was low, almost dangerous. "I fought my way in. I clawed my way up from nothing. People like Lyra, they looked down on me too." Elara's eyes widened, shock flooding through her. "You? Really?" Lucian's shoulders relaxed, his expression softening. Yes, and I learned a long time ago that people will always judge you, no matter who you are or what you've done, so stop worrying about them. You're here because you have talent, because you're the best at what you do. That's all that matters. Elara's chest tightened, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. I don't want people to think that I'm only here because of you. Lucian's eyes softened, his voice lowering. Then prove them wrong. Elara looked up at him, her heart pounding. How? Lucian's lips curved into a small, encouraging smile. By being so good that they can't ignore you. Elara felt a shiver run through her, a spark of determination igniting in her chest. You really believe I can do that? Lucian's gaze was unwavering. I know you can. For a moment they stood in silence, the world around them fading away. Then Lucian's hand slid from her back, his posture relaxing. Come on, we've got work to do. Elara straightened, wiping the lingering doubt from her face. Right, let's do this. As they walked away, Elara stole one last glance at Lyra, who was laughing gracefully among a group of equally polished elites. Maybe she didn't belong in this world yet, but she was going to fight for her place in it, and people like Lyra would just have to get used to it. Later that night, Elara found herself at the hotel bar, nursing a glass of sparkling water. The room was dimly lit, elegantly decorated with velvet couches and gold accents, the soft murmur of French conversations creating a backdrop of sophistication. She told herself she was there to unwind, to reflect on the day's events. But the truth was, she felt out of place everywhere else. Her room felt too big, too luxurious, and she wasn't ready to face her thoughts alone. But then, she saw them. Across the room, standing by the marble fireplace, were Lucian and Lyra. They looked like a scene from a magazine. Him in his perfectly tailored suit, his posture relaxed and confident, and her in that impossibly tight, elegant dress that showed off every curve. Her laughter was light, melodic, and she placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, leaning in just a little too close. Elara's heart twisted painfully. She shouldn't care. It didn't make sense to care. Lucian was her boss. Well, technically, he wasn't even that. He was just the man who had taken her on this crazy, surreal journey, believing in her talent when no one else had. That didn't mean she had any right to feel this. But then Lucian smiled at something Lyra said, a genuine warm smile she hadn't seen before, and Elara's chest tightened. She watched as Lyra's fingers trailed lightly down his arm, her eyes shining with flirtation. Lucian didn't move away. He didn't look uncomfortable, in fact he looked at ease. A sick feeling curled in Elara's stomach, sharp and cold. Before she could process it, she was on her feet, leaving the glass of water behind as she turned and hurried out of the bar. Her heart was racing, her chest aching as she practically ran down the hall, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. She didn't stop until she was back in her hotel room, the door shutting behind her with a heavy thud. Elara leaned against it, her breathing unsteady, her emotions a tangled mess. She sank down onto the bed, her fingers twisting in the plush duvet as she tried to make sense of what she was feeling. Why did it bother her so much? Why did it hurt to see them together? Lucian was Lucian. Charming, powerful, infuriatingly confident. He was the type of man who was born to be with women like Lyra. Beautiful, polished, sophisticated. And Elara was nobody. A former housekeeper who was completely out of her depth, drowning in a world she barely understood. She had no right to feel anything, no right to be jealous, but even as she told herself that, the image of Lyra's fingers on his arm wouldn't leave her mind. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, her chest tightening painfully. She was jealous. The realization crashed into her like a wave, knocking the breath out of her. She was jealous of Lyra, of the way she fit so easily into Lucian's world, of the way she could touch him and laugh with him like she belonged by his side. Elara hugged her knees to her chest, her heart aching with a painful, unfamiliar longing. This was bad. Really, really bad. Because no matter how much she tried to deny it, one truth was becoming clearer and clearer. She was falling for Lucian Scott, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. Elara spent the entire night tossing and turning, her sheets twisting around her legs as if they were trying to trap her. She didn't care. She didn't care that she had seen Lucian laughing with Lyra, his smile easy and genuine. She didn't care that Lyra had touched his arm, her fingers lingering, her gaze flirtatious. She didn't care that they looked perfect together, two beautiful people who belonged to the same world, a world Elara would never be a part of. At least that's what she kept telling herself as she flipped over for the 100th time, punching her pillow into a more comfortable shape. But no matter how hard she tried, sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, the scene replayed in her mind. The way Lyra's laughter had filled the room, light and musical, her body leaning in just a little too close. The way Lucian had smiled at her, his expression warm and familiar. They had looked like they belonged together, like they were meant to be, and Elara had felt like an intruder, an outsider watching a world she would never understand. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the images, but they kept coming back. The knot in her chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. Why did it bother her so much? Why did it hurt to see them together? Lucian was Lucian. Infuriatingly charming, impossibly confident, and completely out of her league. He was a billionaire CEO who navigated high society with ease, who belonged to a world of wealth and power, and she was nothing. A housekeeper who had stumbled into this life by accident, who didn't know the rules of this world, who didn't belong. She was a background character in a movie starring rich, sophisticated people. She had no right to feel jealous, no right to feel hurt. But no matter how hard she tried to rationalize it, the pain wouldn't go away. It sat heavy in her chest, an aching, hollow feeling that made her throat tighten and her eyes burn. Elara rolled over, hugging her pillow tightly as she tried to ignore the sting of tears. Why was she even here? Why had she let herself believe that she could be part of this world, that she could matter to someone like Lucian Scott? She had been stupid, naive. She had let herself get swept up in the magic of Paris, in the excitement of tasting dishes crafted by the best chefs in the world. She had let herself believe she was important, that her talent meant something. But the truth was, she was just a fraud, a nobody pretending to be someone, and it was only a matter of time before everyone saw through her. Lucian belonged with women like Lyra, women who understood his world, who fit perfectly into his life, women who wouldn't embarrass him or hold him back. Elara's chest tightened painfully, her heart twisting. She didn't belong here. She never had, and maybe it was time to stop pretending. Maybe it was time to leave before she made a fool of herself, before she embarrassed Lucian and ruined everything. Maybe it was time to go back to her old life. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she forced them back, swallowing the lump in her throat. She couldn't stay here, pretending to be someone she wasn't. She couldn't keep pretending that she mattered. Elara hugged her pillow tighter, her body curling in on itself as she tried to stop the aching in her chest. She didn't belong, and it was time to accept that. The adventure in Paris allowed Elara and Lucian to finally admit their love for each other. But, as they return to reality, the question remains, can their love withstand the scrutiny of public opinion and the pressures of the high society world? Prepare yourself for part 2, where hidden truths will be revealed. Elara and Lucian will face every challenge together, emerging stronger and ready to embrace a new life filled with happiness and the joy of welcoming their first child. The journey is not just about finding love, but also about discovering themselves amidst the trials and emotions that shaped them. Did you enjoy this story? If so, drop a like and leave a kind comment to encourage us. Your support means the world. And don't forget, we love you.